We break down a few points or the highlights of the Prime Minister's speech today. Of course, it is meant to be a report card of his government, not just over the last 1 year, but given that this is almost the end of his second term, the last 10 years that he has held as the Prime Minister. So first big thing that he has talked about, of course, is that the country is now rid of graft and scams. This is, according to the BJP, their biggest achievement, especially in stark contrast to the UPA 10 years just before the NDA 10 years. He's also talked about or reminded the public how one rank, one pension scheme was brought in. This was one of the first big reforms that the Narendra Modi government had brought in, and a reform that was pending for many, many decades. The poor have become the new middle class. The neo-middle class is something that the Prime Minister said today. And he talked about how tier 2, tier 3 cities are the ones where a lot of the growth for the country has been driven from. 13.5 crore people have been brought out of poverty. This is what a lot of academic studies are also pointing out. States like Uttar Pradesh have led this charge. The Mudra Yojana, one of the flagship schemes of the previous term of this government, is providing jobs. The Prime Minister continued to talk about this. He, of course, extolled the impact that the scheme like Ayushman Bharat has had, healthcare for all via this scheme. This has also been one of the schemes that has touched crores and crores of people's lives. And as the Prime Minister had enumerated in the past, it's one of those things that saves people from falling into the clutches of poverty, because even one illness or accident often pushes those who are on the margins of poverty or in the lower middle class strata and destroys their finances. So something like Ayushman Bharat is instrumental in ensuring that people have some safety net. The other big scheme of the government, Har Ghar Jal, that has ensured water to all. The Prime Minister also went on to talk about how, despite global phenomena, the country has taken strong steps to curb inflation, but it continues to be a challenge for the government. Vande Bharat, the new trains boosting connectivity. This is again one of those things that is part of the government's big ticket infrastructure overhaul, railway stations, airports, highways, new trains, etc. 200 crore Indians vaccinated. This is again one of these achievements that the Prime Minister reminded the public of, especially India being a developing country that did not have PPE kits manufacturing capabilities at one time, made vaccines of its own, not just provided vaccines to the most populous country in the world now, but also actually gave vaccines to many friendly countries as well. He also talked about how India has achieved the target that it had set for itself on renewable energy ahead of time. And this is again something that global bodies are talking about. He also reminded the public of the new parliament building that was built before deadline. So, in other words, just emphasizing the fact that there is not only things that the government has taken upon itself to do, but it has also delivered, not just on a large scale, but in many cases ahead of time. And one of the other big things he talked about is how the climate of terrorism, bomb blasts, serial blasts, uncertainty, of destruction of life and limb and property is a thing of the past. Let me also go across to my colleagues, Pallavi and Arun Dhata, joining us. Pallavi, you know, the contrast that he painted, both in terms of corruption from the UPA era to the NDA era, and in terms of bomb blasts. You know, these are two things that resonate the most on the ground because these are part of lived reality of the people.
Yes, in 2014, when he came to power for the first time, remember he also came in the backdrop of several acts of terror in Kashmir. There were some in Delhi, in Maharashtra. And, you know, consistently the Prime Minister at that point of time would label the then Prime Minister as a weak Prime Minister because he was not talking tough either internally or whether externally. And this has certainly been one of the hallmarks of this government. The fact is that India's foreign policy has been very profound in the sense that calling out the bluff of Pakistan, China, and so on and so forth. And he did make a reference to that. He also talked about, and I was talking about this earlier, Shivani, that, you know, something which had become a very common sign, that be careful of any identified baggage around you. He said, he made a reference to that. He said, you know, all of you must have been used to those kind of signages, but these things seem to have become a thing of the past. No longer are there serial blasts taking place. So, you know, I think as we head into another Lok Sabha election, when the opposition parties, particularly the India front opposition parties, are raising a question mark over the government's ability to maintain law and order, he's throwing it back at them and making the point that that was that era. This is a different time altogether.
Yes. And Arun, the other big thing that the Prime Minister always talks about, and another thing that has become a hallmark of this government, is its large-scale schemes. So whether it was the cylinders in the previous term, it is Har Ghar Jal this time, it is Ayushman Bharat, and the impact of these schemes, even the Mudra Yojana continuing, the impact of these schemes is what the Prime Minister reminded the public of.
Well, that's right. And clearly it was a political speech. Prime Minister Modi spoke about the works which his government has done in past 9 years and various schemes which he initiated, and how those schemes are actually working on the ground, and how those schemes are changing the lives of the people. And in fact, he also set the tone for the upcoming initiatives which Prime Minister Modi and his government are planning. He talked about the affordable loans which his government is planning to give to the people who reside in the urban areas. He specifically talked about those people who, come out of their houses and go out, stay in the cities, take accommodation on rents, and how he's thinking about those people to provide them affordable loans. So that is something which part of the future initiative which he's planning on. And also he's very specifically mentioning about that next year he will be speaking again from the ramparts of RedFort, which was a clear signal that he was saying this thing with full confidence that BJP government is going to come back again in power. And in fact, he talked about the three ills, and BJP in fact in past couple of days has been talking about this. Prime Minister Modi spoke about these three ills in the parliament as well.
Yes.
During the no confidence motion speech, and their ministers also speaking these things, that there are three ills: Parivarvad, corruption and appeasement. These are the things which Congress party has been following, and now the time has come when country is getting rid of these things. The pure and cleaner governance is something which is important at this moment, and therefore people will once again show their confidence in this government, and,
yes.
and therefore he will
one
be
of the things,
coming back again.
Arun, that the BJP has been talking about is Quit India movement. And of course, that's a pun that they've taken from the New India bloc of the opposition parties. And as part of that Quit India movement, they talk about corruption, nepotism or dynastic politics, and appeasement politics. And the Prime Minister reiterated that, even though not in the form of a Quit India slogan.